In the vast expanse of the galactic frontier, where sleek alien warships gleam with advanced technology and pristine hulls, there exists a fundamental truth that every species has learned to respect. Never underestimate the ingenuity of a desperate human with a toolbox. What happens when the galaxy's most advanced civilizations dismiss a cobbled-together vessel as worthless scrap? What occurs when they laugh at hull plating made from recycled mining equipment and weapon systems built from salvaged parts? They're about to discover why humanity didn't conquer the stars through superior technology. They did it through superior stubbornness, creativity, and the unbreakable will to turn yesterday's garbage into tomorrow's nightmare. This is the story of one human mechanic, one impossible ship, and the day an entire alien armada learned that in human hands, even scrap metal can become legendary. Marcus Chen wiped the grease from his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. The ship before him looked like someone had taken parts from a dozen different vessels, thrown them into a blender, and reassembled the pieces while blindfolded. The hull was a patchwork of mismatched metals, some sections gleaming silver from old transport ships, others the dull bronze of mining equipment, and still more patches showing the distinctive blue-green tint of Zephyrian alloys he'd salvaged from a crashed freighter. The resilient Dawn sat in the repair bay of Outpost Meridian, like a mechanical mongrel among purebreds. Around her, sleek Altarian cruisers and elegant Vexian destroyers made her look like a joke that had gone too far. But Marcus saw something different when he looked at his creation. He saw possibility. "You cannot be serious about taking that thing into combat," said Commander Thexvar, his forearms gesticulating wildly as his translator struggled to convey his exasperation. The Krillian officer's chitinous exoskeleton clicked with agitation as he paced around the ship. "This is not a warship. This is barely a functioning vessel. The hull integrity readings are inconsistent across 17 different sections." Marcus shrugged, pulling out a datapad to check the latest diagnostics. "She'll hold together. Every plate has been stress-tested and reinforced. Sure, she doesn't look pretty, but beauty's in the eye of the beholder." "The hegemony fleet will annihilate anything we send against them," Thexvar continued, his voice rising to a pitch that made the universal translator emit small squeaks of protest. "They have dreadnoughts with shield generators that could protect entire cities. Their plasma cannons can melt through 3 meters of military-grade armor plating, and you want to face them with this?" The mechanic ran his hand along a welding seam that joined 2 different types of hull plating. The metal was warm to the touch, and he could feel the subtle vibration of the ship's systems humming beneath the surface. She was alive in a way that factory-built ships never were. Every component had been chosen, modified, and installed with purpose and care. "What's the alternative?" Marcus asked, not looking away from his ship. "The colony ships are 3 days out from Kepler, 442b. The hegemony fleet will reach the system in 2 days. Every other vessel in this sector is either too far away or too damaged to help. We've got what we've got." The truth hung heavy in the recycled air of the repair bay. The Terran colonial fleet had been stretched thin across a dozen systems when the hegemony launched their surprise offensive. The attack on Kepler, 442b, was meant to be a statement, a demonstration that humanity's expansion into disputed territory would not be tolerated. 30,000 colonists, including families with children, were currently in slow-moving transport ships that couldn't outrun a determined asteroid, let alone hegemony interceptors. Captain Sarah Reeves entered the bay, her uniform crisp despite 3 days of continuous crisis management. Her eyes swept over the resilient Dawn with the practiced gaze of someone who had seen too many impossible situations and learned to find hope in the smallest details. "How's our girl looking, Marcus?" "Ready for whatever they want to throw at us," he replied, though privately he wondered if that was entirely true. The ship was functional, yes, but she was also completely untested in real combat. All his calculations and simulations could be wrong. All his modifications could fail at the worst possible moment. But doubt was a luxury they couldn't afford. Reeves nodded slowly. Good, because Admiral Korthak just sent another transmission. He's offering safe passage to our colonists if we surrender the entire Kepler system and acknowledge hegemony territorial claims. And our response? Thexvar asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. The same response humanity has given to every bully for the last 1,000 years, Reeves said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Go to hell. Marcus felt something stir in his chest, a mixture of pride and terror that he'd learned to associate with the best and worst moments of his career. He'd been building and fixing ships since he was old enough to hold a plasma cutter, but he'd never built one knowing it would have to fight for the lives of 30,000 people. The Resilient Dawn wasn't just a ship, she was a statement. In her mismatched hull plates and improvised systems, she represented everything humanity had learned about survival. They didn't have the advanced materials of the Altarians or the sophisticated energy weapons of the Vexians. What they had was the ability to look at a pile of spare parts and see a solution. The weapons systems are fully operational, Marcus reported, calling up another screen on his datapad. I've managed to integrate plasma cannons from a Marauder-class frigate with the targeting systems from a civilian transport. It shouldn't work according to any engineering textbook ever written, but somehow it does. Somehow, Thexvar muttered. Human engineering in 3 words. The shield generators are a bit more complicated, Marcus continued. I couldn't get my hands on military-grade equipment, so I linked together 12 civilian units. They're not as powerful individually, but they can redistribute power dynamically based on where we're taking hits. Plus, if one fails, the others can compensate. Captain Reeves studied the technical readouts with the focused attention of someone whose decisions would determine whether people lived or died. What about speed and maneuverability? That's where things get interesting, Marcus said. And for the first time that day, his voice carried genuine enthusiasm. The main engines are from a racing yacht, completely overpowered for a ship this size. I've added maneuvering thrusters from 6 different sources, which gives us options that most ships don't have. We can accelerate faster than anything in our weight class, and our turning radius is about half what it should be. At the cost of fuel efficiency, I assume, Thexvar said. At the cost of fuel efficiency, Marcus agreed. But if we do this right, the fight won't last long enough for that to matter. The 3 of them stood in silence for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. The ship before them represented their only hope of buying the colony ships enough time to escape to FTL. It wasn't much, but it was something. In the grand scheme of galactic warfare, one small ship facing an entire hegemony battle group was barely worth mentioning. But sometimes the smallest actions had the largest consequences. There's something else, Marcus said finally. Something I haven't told you about the weapons systems. Both officers turned to look at him, and he could see the mix of hope and apprehension in their eyes. In situations like this, surprises could be either salvation or disaster. I found something in the data archives from the Magellan incident, he explained, referring to a battle from 2 years earlier where a human exploration ship had been lost with all hands. The hegemony ships have adaptive shielding. They analyze incoming weapons fire and adjust their defensive parameters accordingly. It's what makes them so hard to damage. This is not news, Thexvar said impatiently. No, but this is. The adaptation algorithms have a flaw. They're designed to handle consistent weapons patterns, the kind you get from military vessels with standardized equipment. But the Resilient Dawn doesn't have standardized anything. Every weapon has different power signatures, different firing patterns, different energy frequencies. Understanding dawned in Captain Reeves's eyes. Their shields won't know how to adapt. Exactly. It'll be like trying to solve the equation where all the variables keep changing. Their computers will go crazy trying to find a pattern that doesn't exist. It was a desperate plan based on untested theories and improvised equipment. It relied on the enemy making assumptions about human capabilities that might prove to be completely wrong. But it was also exactly the kind of asymmetrical thinking that had kept humanity alive in a galaxy full of species with superior technology. Commander Thexvar's exoskeleton plates shifted in what Marcus had learned was the Krillian equivalent of a resigned sigh. In my species' philosophy, there is a saying, "The most dangerous prey is the one with nothing left to lose." "We're not prey," Captain Reeves said firmly. "We're protectors, and that ship is going to protect 30,000 innocent lives or go down trying." Marcus looked at his creation one more time, seeing past the mismatched hull plates and improvised systems to the heart of what she really was. She was hope given physical form, stubborn human refusal to accept defeat, and the absolute conviction that sometimes the impossible was just another word for untried. The resilient Dawn might not look like much, but she was about to become something that would echo through galactic history. In less than 48 hours, she would face an enemy that outgunned and outclassed her in every measurable way. The Smart Money was on a quick, decisive defeat. Smart Money had never met Marcus Chen. 18 hours before the hegemony fleet would arrive at Kepler 442b, Marcus found himself making final adjustments to systems that had no business working together. The resilient Dawn hummed around him with an odd harmony of mechanical sounds, the high whine of Zephyrian power couplers, the deep throb of Terran engines, and the subtle whisper of Altarian life support systems, all somehow finding rhythm together. He was deep in the ship's core, a cramped space that would have been impossible to access in any properly designed vessel. But proper design had never been the point. The point was making things work, and in the maze of conduits and jury-rigged connections that formed the ship's nervous system, Marcus had created something that defied every principle of naval engineering while somehow managing to function. "Chief Chen to the bridge!" Captain Reeves's voice crackled through the internal communication system, which was itself a marvel of improvisation involving spare parts from 4 different manufacturers. Marcus pulled himself out of the maintenance crawlway, checking his datapad one more time. All systems showed green, though he'd had to redefine what normal operating parameters meant for most of them. The shield generators were running at 98% efficiency, which was remarkable considering they'd been designed for completely different applications. The weapons were charged and ready, their mismatched energy signatures creating a chaotic pattern that should, in theory, give the hegemony computers fits. The bridge of the resilient Dawn was cramped compared to the spacious command centers of dedicated warships, but it felt right to Marcus. Every station was within arm's reach of every other station, and the displays showed real-time information about systems that the original designers had never intended to be connected. It was organized chaos, but it was their chaos. "What's the latest on the hegemony fleet?" Marcus asked as he slid into the engineering station, which was really just a modified pilot's chair surrounded by displays showing the ship's vital signs. "Long-range sensors picked them up an hour ago," Reeves replied, her fingers dancing across the tactical display. "Admiral Korthak is commanding from the dreadnought Inevitable Victory. 12 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and a carrier with 36 fighters. They're not taking any chances." Thexvar looked up from the communication station, his 4 hands working multiple interfaces simultaneously. "The colony ships are still 18 hours from the FTL jump point. Even if we delay the hegemony fleet, they need at least 12 hours to complete their escape preparations." The math was simple and brutal. 1 small ship against 19 warships and 3 dozen fighters. Even if the resilient Dawn performed perfectly, even if every theoretical advantage Marcus had built into her systems worked exactly as intended, the odds were astronomical. "Any word from the Colonial Fleet Command?" Marcus asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Admiral Harrison sends his regrets and best wishes for our success," Reeves said with carefully controlled bitterness. "The nearest battle group is 6 days away. We're on our own." Marcus nodded, checking his displays again. The ship's systems were holding steady, but he could see small fluctuations that indicated stress on the integrated components. The resilient Dawn had never been designed for extended combat operations. She was a sprint runner being asked to compete in a marathon. "There's something else," Thexvar said, his voice carrying an odd note. "I've been monitoring hegemony communications. They're amused by us." "Amused?" Reeves asked. "Admiral Korthak has been sharing intelligence reports about our ship with his fleet commanders. They find the idea of facing a scrap heap vessel entertaining. Several have made wagers about how quickly we'll surrender." A slow smile spread across Marcus's face. "Good. Let them be entertained. Overconfident enemies make mistakes." He pulled up a three-dimensional hologram of the Kepler system, studying the geometry of the coming battle. The colony ships were currently following a standard evacuation trajectory, predictable, safe, and slow. The hegemony fleet would enter the system near the outer gas giant and follow an efficient intercept course that would bring them into contact with the civilian ships in approximately 36 hours, unless something delayed them. "Here's what we're going to do," Marcus said, manipulating the hologram to show ship movements. "We don't try to fight their entire fleet at once. We hit their advanced scouts, force them to group up, then use our speed advantage to stay ahead of their main formation while we pick off individual ships." "Classic guerrilla tactics," Reeves agreed. "But Marcus, even their scouts outgun us significantly." "On paper, yes. But remember what we discussed about their adaptive shields. Every hegemony vessel uses the same defensive algorithms, which means they all have the same vulnerability. If we can exploit it against one ship, we can exploit it against all of them." Thexfar's exoskeleton plates clicked thoughtfully. "You're proposing to fight like humans have always fought, using unpredictability as a weapon." "Exactly. The hegemony has conquered 17 star systems using superior technology and overwhelming force. They've never faced an enemy that couldn't be categorized and countered by their tactical computers. We're about to give them a crash course in human improvisation." The next few hours passed in a blur of final preparations and system checks. Marcus found himself thinking about the people they were protecting. 30,000 colonists who had left Earth or Mars or Europa or any of a dozen human worlds to start fresh on a planet they'd never seen. They weren't soldiers or politicians or corporate executives. They were farmers and teachers and engineers and artists, people who believed in the fundamental human dream that tomorrow could be better than today. They deserved better than to have their future decided by one crazy mechanic and his impossible ship. As they approached the outer edge of the Kepler system, long-range sensors began picking up the first signs of the enemy fleet. The hegemony ships were running silent, but their massive hulls created gravitational distortions that couldn't be hidden from sensitive detection equipment. "Contact bearing 27 Mark IV, reported Ensign Park from the sensor station. "Single ship, probably a destroyer running advanced reconnaissance." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. This was it, the moment when all his theories and calculations would be tested against reality. He checked the weapons one more time, noting the chaotic energy patterns that should confuse enemy defensive systems. The shield generators were ready to redistribute power dynamically. The engines were primed for rapid acceleration and maneuvering. The resilient Dawn might not look like much, but she was ready for war. "All stations report ready," Captain Reeves announced. "Mr. Chen, this is your show. How do you want to play it?" Marcus studied the tactical display, considering their options. The enemy destroyer was following a standard patrol pattern, probably confident that any human vessels would either flee immediately or attempt a direct engagement. They wouldn't be expecting something that didn't fit into their established tactical database. "We go in, fast and close," he decided. "Maximum acceleration on an intercept course. Let them think we're desperate enough to try a ramming attack. When they start evasive maneuvers, we hit them with everything we've got from minimum range." "That's extremely dangerous," Thexfar pointed out. "If our shields fail or our weapons malfunction, then we die," Marcus said simply. "But if we try to fight them at long range using conventional tactics, we die anyway. Our only advantage is that they don't know what we're capable of. Let's use that." Captain Reeves nodded slowly. "Do it. All hands, prepare for combat acceleration. Mr. Chen, the ship is yours." Marcus's hands moved across his controls with practiced efficiency, bringing the resilient Dawn's various systems into combat configuration. The mismatched engines roared to life, pushing the ship forward with acceleration that would have been impossible for a vessel of her apparent size and mass. The weapons charged with a sound like thunder rolling through the hull, and the shields hummed with barely contained energy. On the main display, the enemy destroyer grew larger by the second. Marcus could see the elegant lines of hegemony design, smooth curves and perfect proportions that spoke of advanced engineering and unlimited resources. It was beautiful in the way that predators were beautiful, all efficiency and lethal grace. The resilient Dawn, by contrast, looked like she'd been built in someone's garage by a mechanic with more determination than sense. Which, Marcus reflected, was essentially accurate. "Enemy vessel is hailing us," Park reported. "Put it through," Reeves ordered. The main screen flickered to display the bridge of the hegemony destroyer. Admiral Korthak's subordinate, a hegemony officer with the distinctive scaled skin and predatory eyes of his species, looked at them with obvious amusement. "Human vessel," the alien said, his voice carrying the artificial precision of a universal translator. "You are vastly outmatched and have no chance of survival. Surrender immediately, and your deaths will be quick." Marcus leaned forward in his chair, making sure he was visible on the transmission. "Thanks for the offer, but we'll pass. You see, we didn't come here to surrender. We came here to give you an education." The hegemony officer's eyes narrowed. "Education? In human engineering?" Marcus replied with a grin. "Class is now in session." He cut the transmission and immediately threw the ship into a violent evasive pattern that should have torn apart any conventional vessel. The resilient Dawn held together her reinforced hull plates and redundant support systems, absorbing stresses that would have shattered a factory-built ship. Behind them, the enemy destroyer scrambled to adjust its firing solution as its targets suddenly became much more difficult to hit. It was time to find out if scrap metal could become legendary. The hegemony destroyer opened fire first, its plasma cannons painting brilliant streaks of superheated energy across the void. Marcus threw the resilient Dawn into a corkscrew pattern that should have been impossible for a ship of her size, the mismatched thrusters firing in sequences that created an unpredictable flight path. The enemy fire missed by meters, close enough that the sensors screamed warnings about heat, bloom, and radiation exposure, but far enough away to keep them alive. "Their targeting computers are struggling," Ensign Park reported from the sensor station, her voice tight with concentration. "They keep adjusting their firing solutions, but they can't lock onto our pattern." Marcus grinned despite the situation. The resilient Dawn's chaotic maneuvering wasn't just random. It was the result of careful programming that used the ship's mismatched thruster systems to create movement patterns that violated conventional naval doctrine. No two evasive maneuvers were quite the same, and the variations were just subtle enough to make predictive targeting nearly impossible. "Closing to optimal weapons range," Captain Reeves announced. 10 seconds to firing position." The enemy destroyer was turning to bring its main batteries to bear, its movements precise and elegant. Marcus could see the logic in its positioning. The hegemony commander was trying to create a classic engagement scenario where superior firepower would decide the outcome quickly and efficiently. It was exactly what the resilient Dawn's design was meant to counter. "All weapons, fire!" Reeves commanded. The effect was immediate and spectacular. Instead of the coordinated barrage that would have come from a military vessel with standardized weapons, the resilient Dawn unleashed a completely chaotic pattern of energy beams, plasma bolts, and particle streams. Each weapon had different power signatures, different firing rates, and different energy frequencies. The result looked less like naval combat and more like an explosion in a fireworks factory. The hegemony destroyer's shields flared as they tried to adapt to the incoming fire. Marcus watched the sensor readouts with fascination as the enemy defensive systems struggled to analyze and counter the attack. The adaptive algorithms that made hegemony vessels nearly invulnerable against conventional weapons were designed to find patterns and exploit them. But there was no pattern to find. Direct hits on their forward shield array, Park reported, her voice rising with excitement. Their defensive efficiency is dropping rapidly. The destroyer's shields were cycling through different configurations, trying desperately to find a defensive pattern that would work against weapons that followed no logical system. Each time the computers thought they had found a solution, another weapon would fire with completely different characteristics, forcing the system to start over. Their shields are at 60% and falling, Thexvar announced. This should not be possible, but it was happening. The elegant hegemony destroyer, with its advanced technology and superior firepower, was being steadily worn down by a ship that looked like it had been assembled in a junkyard. Marcus felt a surge of vindication that was almost intoxicating. Every jury-rigged system, every improvised connection, every component that had no business working with the others was performing exactly as he'd hoped. The destroyer's return fire was more concentrated now, the commander clearly frustrated by his inability to score decisive hits. Plasma beams slammed into the resilient Dawn's shields, causing power fluctuations that made the lights flicker throughout the ship. But the shield generators held, redistributing energy automatically to compensate for the damage. Forward shields at 40%, Marcus reported, transferring power from aft generators to compensate. It was a dance of destruction, two ships circling each other in the vast emptiness of space while exchanging fire at energies that could vaporize cities. But it was an unequal dance, and slowly but inevitably, the resilient Dawn was winning. Their weapons are recycling faster than ours, Captain Reeves observed, studying the tactical display. We need to end this quickly. Marcus nodded, his fingers flying over his controls as he brought up the ship's most experimental system. It was something he'd built in secret, a weapon that existed nowhere in any military database because he'd invented it himself. It combined elements from mining lasers, industrial cutting equipment, and salvaged military hardware into something that shouldn't have worked at all. "I'm going to try something," he announced. "It might work, or it might overload our entire power grid." "What kind of something?" Thexvar asked nervously. "The kind that wins fights or kills us all," Marcus replied. "Captain, I need you to get us within 500 meters of their hull." Reeves didn't hesitate. "You heard him. Take us in close." The resilient Dawn accelerated directly toward the enemy destroyer, her engines screaming with power that threatened to tear the ship apart. The hegemony vessel tried to evade, but its superior size worked against it in close-quarters maneuvering. The distance between the ships closed rapidly, and Marcus could see individual details on the enemy hull. Weapon ports, sensor arrays, and the elegant script of hegemony identification markings. 400 meters in closing, Park announced. 300 meters. 200 meters. The destroyer's point defense systems came online, filling the space between the ships with a deadly crossfire of energy beams. The resilient Dawn's shields flared and sparked as they absorbed the punishment, but they held together through sheer redundancy and Marcus's careful engineering. 100 meters and holding position, Reeves announced. Marcus triggered his improvised weapon system. The effect was unlike anything in recorded naval combat. Instead of a focused beam or projectile, the resilient Dawn projected a field of chaotic energy that seemed to eat through the destroyer's hull, plating like acid through paper. The carefully ordered molecular structure of hegemony armor, designed to resist conventional weapons, simply couldn't cope with energy that refused to behave according to known physics. The field burned through the destroyer's hull in seconds, reaching critical systems and causing a cascade of failures throughout the ship. Marcus watched in amazement as his impossible weapon did exactly what his calculations had predicted. It ignored every known defensive technology and struck directly at the target's structural integrity. "Their main power core is destabilizing," Park reported in a voice filled with disbelief. "They're losing containment on their fusion reactors. The hegemony destroyer tried to pull away, its engines firing desperately as the crew realized their situation had become untenable. But the damage was already done. The ship's carefully balanced systems were failing in sequence, each failure triggering others in a cascade that no amount of technological sophistication could stop. "They're abandoning ship," Thexvar announced. "Multiple escape pods launching." Marcus powered down his experimental weapon, noting with satisfaction that it had performed exactly as intended, without destroying his own ship in the process. The resilient Dawn pulled back from the dying destroyer, her crew watching in stunned silence as one of the galaxy's most advanced warships tore itself apart from the inside. The explosion, when it came, was spectacular. The destroyer's fusion core finally lost containment, creating a brief star that illuminated the entire outer system. When the light faded, nothing remained but expanding clouds of superheated plasma and debris that would eventually become just another asteroid field. "One down," Captain Reeves said quietly. 18 to go. But Marcus was already looking at the sensor displays, where new contacts were appearing at the edge of detection range. The main hegemony fleet had detected the destruction of their scout and was accelerating toward their position. Admiral Korthak was no longer treating this as an amusing diversion. He was bringing his entire force to bear on the single ship that had just proved human technology was more dangerous than anyone had imagined. "They're coming in fast," Park reported. Estimated time to contact, 47 minutes. Marcus checked his ship's status, noting the power drain from the experimental weapon and the damage to the forward shields. The resilient Dawn had won her first fight, but she'd also revealed capabilities that would make the enemy much more cautious. The next engagement would be different. "Can we do that again?" Reeves asked. "Once more, maybe twice if we're lucky," Marcus replied. "That weapon draws power from every system on the ship. We can't use it repeatedly without risking complete power failure." Thexvar's exoskeleton clicked thoughtfully. "The hegemony commanders will be analyzing the battle data from the destroyer. They'll adapt their tactics." "Good," Marcus said with confidence he didn't entirely feel. "Let them adapt. Humans have been adapting faster than anyone else for millions of years. It's what we do best." He pulled up the tactical display, studying the approaching fleet formation. 19 ships had become 18, but the odds were still overwhelming. However, something had changed in the last few minutes. The resilient Dawn was no longer just a desperate last stand. She was a proven threat that had destroyed a hegemony warship in single combat. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when you underestimated human ingenuity. Admiral Korthak's face appeared on the main screen 43 minutes later, his scaled features twisted with cold fury. The elegant bridge of the dreadnought Inevitable Victory stretched behind him, filled with officers who moved with the precision of a species that had conquered most of the known galaxy. Marcus noted the way they all avoided looking directly at their admiral, a sign that someone important was not happy about recent developments. "I underestimated you," Korthak said without preamble. "The loss of the swift retribution was unexpected. You fight without honor, using weapons that violate the accepted conventions of warfare." Captain Reeves stepped into view of the transmission. "We fight to win, Admiral. Honor is a luxury we can't afford when protecting innocent lives." "Innocent?" Northhack's laugh was like breaking glass. "You humans spread through the galaxy like a plague, claiming systems that belong to superior species. Your innocents are colonizers and thieves." Marcus watched the exchange while simultaneously monitoring his ship's systems. The resilient Dawn was running on borrowed time. The experimental weapon had drained their power reserves more than he'd anticipated, and several of the mismatched components were showing signs of stress. They needed to end this fight quickly, before their luck ran out. "Your philosophical objections are noted," Reeves replied calmly. "But those colonists aren't soldiers or politicians. They're families looking for a new home. If you have a problem with human expansion, take it up with our governments. Leave the civilians out of it." "There will be no civilians left to spare once I'm done with you," Korthak said. "You destroyed one of my ships through trickery and deception." Now you face the full might of the hegemony fleet. Surrender, and I will make your deaths quick." Marcus leaned into the transmission range. "Counteroffer. You leave this system immediately, and we'll pretend this conversation never happened." The alien admiral's eyes focused on him with predatory intensity. "You must be the engineer responsible for that abomination you call a warship. Tell me, human, what did you build from scrap metal that could penetrate hegemony shields?" "Wouldn't want to spoil the surprise," Marcus replied with a grin that he hoped looked more confident than he felt. "But stick around, and you'll find out firsthand." Korthak's image vanished as the transmission ended, replaced by a tactical display that showed the approaching fleet in all its terrifying glory. 12 heavy cruisers formed the main battle line, their massive hulls bristling with weapons that could crack planets. 6 destroyers provided escort and screening duties, their sleek forms designed for speed and precision strikes. The carrier hung back at maximum range, its fighter bays already launching wings of interceptors. And at the center of it all, the dreadnought Inevitable Victory advanced with the inexorable momentum. Marcus had seen ships like her in intelligence briefings, 2 kilometers of armored death carrying enough firepower to sterilize continents. She was everything the Resilient Dawn was not: massive, powerful, and built by a civilization that had never known defeat. "They're spreading into attack formation," Ensign Park reported. "Cruisers are taking flanking positions, while the destroyers form a screening line. Estimated time to weapons range, 12 minutes. Marcus studied the enemy formation with growing unease. Korthak was no longer treating them as an amusing diversion. This was a carefully orchestrated assault designed to eliminate any possibility of escape or evasion. The hegemony ships were positioning themselves to create overlapping fields of fire that would trap the Resilient Dawn in a killing box. "We can't fight them all at once," Thexvar observed, his 4 arms working frantically at the communications console. "Even if our weapons perform as effectively as they did against the destroyer, we simply don't have enough firepower to engage 18 ships simultaneously." "Then we don't fight them all at once," Marcus replied, his mind racing through possibilities and calculations. "We use our speed advantage to separate them, force them to engage us in smaller groups. The fighters will be a problem. 36 interceptors can swarm us even if we outrun the capital ships." Marcus nodded, pulling up another set of schematics on his personal display. The Resilient Dawn's defensive systems were designed to handle conventional threats, but fighter swarms required a completely different approach. Fortunately, he'd been planning for exactly this scenario. "I've got something for the fighters," he announced. "Remember those mining charges I salvaged from the Titan excavation platform? I've rigged them into proximity mines with simple guidance systems. They can't track targets like real missiles, but they don't need to. They just need to explode near fast-moving objects." "Improvised area denial weapons," Reeves said with growing understanding. "Brilliant. How many do we have?" 47 charges, each with enough explosive power to cripple a fighter or damage a destroyer. But the guidance systems are basic, but they should be effective against targets moving in predictable attack patterns. The plan that emerged over the next few minutes was insane by any rational standard. Instead of running or trying to find a defensive position, they were going to charge directly into the heart of the enemy formation. The Resilient Dawn would use her superior acceleration to reach the carrier before its fighters could effectively deploy, forcing the escort vessels to choose between protecting their mothership and maintaining formation integrity. "It's completely crazy," Thexvar said when Marcus finished explaining his strategy. "We'll be surrounded and outnumbered by factors that make victory mathematically impossible." "Math has never been humanity's strong suit," Marcus replied. "We prefer to deal with reality as we find it, not as equations say it should be." The next few minutes passed in tense preparation. Marcus ran final diagnostics on every system, noting which components were operating within normal parameters and which were held together by determination and prayer. The weapons showed green across the board, though he knew that could change quickly under combat stress. The shields were recharged and ready, their chaotic redistribution patterns primed for maximum effectiveness. Most importantly, his experimental weapon was cycling through its power-up sequence. He'd only get 1 or 2 shots with it before risking total system failure, which meant he had to make them count. "Enemy fighters launching," Park announced. 36 interceptors forming attack formations. Marcus watched the small craft accelerate away from their carrier, their movements precise and coordinated. Hegemony fighters were faster and more maneuverable than anything humanity had ever built, with pilots who had trained their entire lives for space combat. In a fair fight, they would tear the resilient Dawn apart in minutes. Marcus had no intention of fighting fair. "Deploy the mines," he ordered, triggering the release sequence that ejected 47 modified mining charges into space. The improvised weapons spread out in a rough sphere around the ship's position, their simple guidance systems activating and beginning to search for targets. The effect was immediate and chaotic. The hegemony fighters, accustomed to conventional point defense systems, suddenly found themselves flying through a field of unpredictable explosives. Their formation scattered as pilots tried to avoid the drifting charges while maintaining their attack vectors. "Direct hit on lead fighter squadron," Park reported with satisfaction. 4 confirmed kills, 3 more showing damage. But the miners were learning quickly, adjusting their approach to account for the improvised minefield. Marcus watched as they reorganized into smaller groups, using coordinated maneuvers to clear safe passages through the explosive barrier. "They're adapting faster than I hoped," he admitted. Time to move to Phase 2. The resilient Dawn's engines roared to life, accelerating the ship directly toward the center of the enemy formation. The mismatched thrusters fired in perfect coordination, creating acceleration forces that should have crushed the crew or torn the ship apart. But the reinforced internal structure held, and the inertial dampeners that Marcus had borrowed from 6 different sources somehow managed to keep everyone conscious. "Incoming fire from the destroyer screen," Park announced as energy beams began to bracket their position. Marcus threw the ship into another of his impossible evasive patterns, watching with satisfaction as the hegemony gunners struggled to predict his movements. The resilient Dawn twisted and rolled through space like a living thing, her course so erratic that even her own crew had trouble following it. But they were getting closer to the carrier, and that meant they were getting closer to the moment when everything would depend on whether scrap metal and human stubbornness could overcome the finest military technology in the galaxy. The swarm was closing in, and the real battle was about to begin. The carrier Endless Swarm loomed before them like a mechanical city, its hull stretching nearly a kilometer in length and bristling with launch bays that were still disgorging fighters. Marcus could see the elegant script of hegemony markings along its sides, symbols that declared the vessel's victories across dozens of star systems. In 3 minutes, the resilient Dawn would either add her name to galactic history or become just another debris field in space. "All remaining fighters are launching," Ensign Park reported, her voice tight with concentration. "I'm reading 60-plus small craft converging on our position." The math was undeniable. Even with their improvised minefield and chaotic maneuvering, they were about to be overwhelmed by sheer numbers. But mathematics had never stopped humans before, and it wasn't going to stop them now. "Weapons range in 30 seconds, Captain Reeves announced. "Mr. Chen, whatever you're planning, now would be an excellent time." Marcus's fingers danced across his control panel, bringing the experimental weapon online for what might be its final use. The power drain was enormous, pulling energy from life support, artificial gravity, and even the emergency systems. Warning lights flickered across the bridge as non-essential systems shut down to feed the hungry weapon. "I need to get us within point-blank range of their main launch bay," he said, studying the carrier's structure on his displays. "If I can punch through their hull integrity at the right spot, I might be able to trigger a sympathetic detonation in their ordnance storage." "That's suicide," Thexvar protested. "The explosion would destroy us as well." "Only if we're still there when it happens," Marcus replied with a grin that felt slightly insane. "Trust me, I've done the calculations." The resilient Dawn dove toward the carrier's main hangar opening. her mismatched engines pushing her far beyond safe operating parameters. Behind them, the remaining hegemony fighters struggled to keep pace while avoiding the drifting mines that continued to explode with unpredictable timing. The larger ships were closing in as well, their massive weapons beginning to track the small vessel that had somehow become the most dangerous target in the system. 15 seconds to optimal firing position, Reeves announced. Marcus could see individual hegemony crew members through the carrier's transparent launch bay doors, their scaled faces turned upward in shock as they realized what was about to happen. The Resilient Dawn was coming in fast and low, her approach vector calculated to maximize damage while minimizing the time they'd spend in the carrier's defensive fire envelope. 10 seconds. The carrier's point defense systems opened fire, filling the space around the launch bay with a deadly crossfire of energy beams. The Resilient Dawn's shields flared and sparked as they absorbed the punishment, power levels dropping rapidly under the sustained assault. 5 seconds. Forward shields failing, Marcus reported, watching his displays with the detached calm that came during moments of ultimate crisis. We're running on backup power. The Courage tried with a sound like reality being torn apart. The chaotic energy field struck the carrier's hangar bay and began eating through the reinforced hull plating like a living thing. Marcus watched in fascination as his impossible weapon ignored every known law of physics and engineering, carving through armor that should have been invulnerable. But the carrier was fighting back. Emergency force fields snapped into place across the breach, trying to contain the damage. Damage control teams rushed to seal the compromised sections. For a moment, it seemed like the mighty vessel might absorb the attack and continue fighting. Then the energy field reached the ordnance storage areas. The explosion began deep in the carrier's hull and propagated outward with the inevitability of a natural disaster. Marcus had calculated the precise point where the ship's own weapons and fuel would create a cascade failure, and his targeting had been perfect. The endless swarm began tearing itself apart. From the inside, secondary explosions rippling along its length as ammunition stores and fuel tanks succumbed to the chain reaction. "Full acceleration, now!" Marcus shouted, throwing every available watt of power into the engines. The Resilient Dawn shot away from the dying carrier like a bullet, her crew pressed into their seats by acceleration that tested the limits of human endurance. Behind them, the explosion continued to build, consuming the massive vessel in a growing sphere of superheated plasma and debris. "The carrier is gone," Park announced in a voice filled with awe. "Complete structural failure across all sections." But Marcus was already looking ahead to the next challenge. The destruction of the carrier had eliminated the fighter threat, but the capital ships were still closing in. Admiral Korthak's dreadnought led the formation, its massive bulk accelerating with surprising speed for something so large. To Prosody, incoming transmission from the inevitable victory, Thexvar reported. "Put it through," Captain Reeves ordered. Admiral Korthak appeared on the main screen, but his earlier composure had been replaced by cold fury. The elegant bridge behind him showed signs of frantic activity as his officers struggled to adapt to a situation that had moved far beyond their tactical expectations. "You have destroyed 2 of my ships," the alien admiral said, his voice carrying the weight of barely controlled rage. "Ships that have served the hegemony with honor for decades. Whatever you've done to create these weapons, it ends now." Marcus leaned into view of the transmission. "Funny thing about engineering, Admiral, once you prove something is possible, it gets a lot easier to do it again." "You're bluffing," Korthak snarled. "No species can develop weapons technology this advanced without years of research and testing. Your ship is an aberration, a lucky accident that will be corrected." "Jog Abbott." "Maybe," Marcus agreed. "Or maybe you've been fighting enemies who followed the rules for so long that you've forgotten what happens when someone throws the rulebook out the window." The transmission ended, and Marcus turned his attention back to the tactical display. The remaining hegemony ships were spreading into a wide formation designed to prevent the Resilient Dawn from using her speed advantage. They were learning, adapting their tactics to counter human unpredictability. Unfortunately for them, Marcus was adapting too. "I've been thinking about our next move," he announced. "We've proven we can take out individual ships, but we can't win a prolonged engagement against their entire fleet, so we don't try to." "Explain," Reeves said. "We make them chase us," Marcus replied, pulling up a three-dimensional map of the local space. "Lead them away from the colony ships, while picking off stragglers. Turn this into a running battle, where our superior acceleration gives us the advantage." It was another insane plan that depended on the Resilient Dawn's ability to outrun and outmaneuver ships that outgunned her by orders of magnitude. But it was also exactly the kind of asymmetrical warfare that had kept humanity alive in a hostile galaxy. Over the next 4 hours, the Resilient Dawn led the Hegemony fleet on a chase that would become the stuff of legend. Marcus used every trick he'd ever learned about space combat, every modification he'd made to his impossible ship, and every advantage that came from fighting without regard for conventional tactics. They struck at isolated destroyers, using the experimental weapon to cripple their engines before disappearing into the void. They laid improvised minefields that forced the enemy formation to spread out, making coordination difficult. They even used the system's asteroid belt as cover, hiding among the rocks while planning their next attack. Each engagement took its toll on the Hegemony fleet. Ships that had conquered star systems found themselves outmaneuvered by a vessel that shouldn't have existed. Crews that had never known defeat watched their companions die to weapons that violated every principle of galactic warfare. And through it all, the Resilient Dawn held together. Her mismatched hull plates absorbed punishment that should have shattered her. Her improvised systems continued to function despite operating far beyond their design parameters. She was more than a ship. She was proof that human ingenuity could overcome any obstacle. When the colonial transports finally reached the FTL jump point and disappeared into hyperspace, they left behind a system where 12 Hegemony ships had been reduced to 7. Admiral Korthak's mighty fleet had been mauled by a single opponent that they'd initially dismissed as a joke. The Resilient Dawn had completed her mission, but more than that, she'd become something that would echo through galactic history. News of the battle would spread to every star system, carried by merchants and diplomats who would tell the story of the scrap-built ship that had stood against the Hegemony and won. Marcus Chen had set out to protect 30,000 civilians. Instead, he changed the course of galactic warfare forever. The age of human expansion was about to begin in earnest, and it would be built on the foundation of one simple truth. Never underestimate a human with a toolbox and something to protect. The galaxy would never be the same. They scoffed at the scrap-built ship. Then the human mechanic proved its devastating power. HFY Sci-Fi.